Hi, I want to make a video on the probability of human life and each individual's experience of being. Obviously, a question I have concerning this is why are we ourselves? Why are we who we are? Why am I this awareness in this consciousness in this being as opposed to someone else? Why am I me? And what prevented me from being anyone else, any one of these other people on the planet? And that's obviously a question that you can obviously have. It's obviously because we are who we are. We are who we were born to be, and obviously that sounds very goofy, but we are. This body is this body is who I am, and there's no other way I could have been anyone else because I just came out as this being. Why am I me? Why didn't I? Why wasn't I from someone else? Why am I not someone else? And this goes back to all of the fact that well, consider all these other all these other possibilities of other people existing, all these other possibilities. So what's the possibility of all these infinite number of people that can exist? And like I said, the concept of infinite is very wishy-washy. It's not really a very good concept to go by because the concept's so vague, so incorrect, so inaccurate to any kind of reality that makes any sense in this reality. It can't be proven. It can't be because by its very definition, it's something that has no beginning and it has no end. And we can only apply definitions that are possible in this reality to a very bad word that doesn't have a really good definition other than a concept that we can't necessarily use other than to put some kind of oomph or a power or meaning to some kind of concept to make it seem like, oh, this is going to go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. I guess you can say it can have two meanings, something that goes on until it stops, or something that goes on has no beginning and no end. And I'd say there's no infinite number of people that could have existed. Like I said, it has to do with this kind of deterministic universe that we're living in. And that can be proven by cause and effect and how everything obviously isn't beyond control based on this chessboard that keeps shaking, the pieces keep bumping into each other, and there's nothing we could do about it. And that's in and of itself the first cause in the universe, blah, 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 had an effect. And all this effect was all these, from the initial cause, had this initial, the thing, the boom, and all this was the effect. And this effect, how all these different pieces are moving, this constant movement, obviously there's nothing we can do. I have an effect on them, they have an effect on me, and they have just as much of an effect on me than I have an effect on me, and I have just as much an effect on them as they have an effect on themselves, and there's just a bouncing back and forth. And from our point of view, it's kind of like a chaos kind of mechanism, but it's obviously a deterministic mechanism that's working a certain way, is going to have a certain outcome in the end. These causes and effects are one and one. One thing is going to happen based off all these different these causes and effects. This is going to happen because this is going to happen. This is going to happen because this happened previously, and this led up to this, and we're all bumping into each other. And back to the whole, infinite number of people that could have existed. Well, you're hurting all these people that could have existed, but they're not existing. You can't hurt someone that doesn't exist. They're not begging to be in life. They're not begging to be here. And we're one and one. Every person that exists, and another proof is why who we are is this whole one and one concept. We are one and one. Each person that comes in here is one to one. The amount of people that are going to have existed on this planet is going to be one to one. It's not going to be, well, one to infinity. No. First of all, obviously, we go back to the idea that infinity can't be a concept that can be necessarily applied, at least not reasonably so, not yet, to the reality that we're living in. A concept that has no beginning, no end. It's almost like saying there's no definition to this word because the word is so vague in its concept and its premise to begin with. The no beginning, no end thing. And it's more of a power word to use when you're describing a situation. The eternal pain, or something like that, sort of like it's used in the Bible, and eternity and this and that and whatnot, and all sorts of religious texts and things like that. But each person that exists is a one-to-one ratio. This person exists, that person is going to be themselves, one and one. They exist. The whole population as a whole is going to be one and one. All the people that ever existed, all the sentient beings that ever existed, everything that's happened the way it has happened is one in one. Everything, one in one. And that's all we're doing. It's we're living the one-to-one life. And the probability of me being here was 1 to 1. The possibility it was going to happen, no matter what. And it obviously goes back to this deterministic thing. and how everything's laid out before us, and things are going to happen, and it's cause and effect, and blah 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 blah. Everything's a cause, everything's an effect, everything just mingles together, and obviously beyond any reasonable way to describe it, we're just bouncing off of each other and having just one chaotic mess of an effect in the end, creating an end outcome, a long, protracted an effect, and a constant movement of effects. So that's all we're doing. We're experiencing the effect based off the initial cause, and that makes us one and one based off of determinism alone, and how there's not an infinite number of people, because infinite, obviously, a word, all these number of this infinite number of people, infinite, the very word that's based on, that's the word that the preface, the prefacing word to this whole premise is infinite. Obviously, the infinite number of people that could have existed. No, everyone that has existed, is existing, and will exist is one-to-one, because they're going to exist. Things are going to happen, and once they happen that way, that's obviously the way they were going to happen. And recognizing that doesn't mean that we're looking at it from an outside point of view. Just recognizing determinism doesn't mean that there is no determinism. I want to use an example, sort of like recognizing a turkey doesn't mean that there isn't a turkey. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good enough example or analogy. Recognizing a turkey doesn't mean there's a turkey. I mean, it doesn't mean there is not a turkey. It means there is a turkey. Yeah, so that's exactly the point. And there is determinism. We're driven by these very self-exempling, self-existing, self-showing mechanisms. These mechanisms that show themselves in front of us. It's obviously a mechanism, it's obviously just something that's confused by perceptions and people's inability or lack of thinking about the subjects and applying them coherently and consistently across everything they do. They obviously know there's a cause and effect, but do they realize it's a cause and effect? Because cause and effect causes cause and effect, and it keeps going in a line based off of all these mechanisms moving in one. Even if there was just one person on the planet, there's all sorts of different mechanisms still moving around, causing that one person that exists, the one sentient being existing, to move in a certain way. If there was no one, it'd still be the exact same way. Just because we're here doesn't mean it. Just means it's just there is a meaningful commodity at the exposure of this very deterministic universe that we're based on this mechanism that was meant for all these inanimate objects, all these things moving. We're just something that's aware, experiencing this chaotic mess. This mess that things are just going to things are going to happen. The whole concept of fairness doesn't exist because of that as well, because we're aware, we can feel pain, we can feel these negative sensations, and there's nothing but negative sensations and relief of those negative sensations. The fact that there's only relief from negative sensations and no real positives, and that we're at the exposure, and the game relies on that, the game relies on that as a whole, and that we're at the exposure of all these crude mechanisms that control this universe and this reality that we're living in, that everything that the expectation of any kind of reaction or emotion isn't to be expected, and the fact that we do have these emotions shows that it's wildly unlikely. It's one-to-one that we exist. Who knows if the likelihood of anyone else existing out there? Obviously, it's a completely different subject, but the proof is in the pudding, and we don't have any pudding right now. The pudding is thin air right now, and that's all we have. That's all we have, thin air. Nothing else. Then we're going off thin air. We're looking at thin air, and that's all there is, nothing. And that's all we have to preface any kind of proof of anything that we, to the contrary. So yes, we are one in one. This deterministic universe, obviously people recognize cause and effect. But if they want to, it's a perception of the way, and perception has a lot to in the way of confusing people's idea of subjective and recognition. But there is an objective fact underlying everything. Sort of like everything is happening a certain way. There's something over there. There's something laying over there, and just because you don't perceive it or you don't want to perceive it, you're in denial. Doesn't mean it's not there. Doesn't mean the molecules aren't moving around in a certain way over there. Doesn't mean that your brain moving around, the very idea of you being deluded and not believing it. Well, you're being deluded right now. The idea of me using this concept doesn't destroy the doesn't distort the fact that there's something still going on, and it's happening in a one-to-one way. It's happening, and your perception is just something happening in reaction to it. It doesn't matter that you don't want to acknowledge it. You don't acknowledge it, you can't acknowledge it. It's still happening no matter what. So our projections of this idea of infinite and things like that, we are one-to-one. Things are up a certain way. There's no infinite amount of people that are going to exist because, like I said, this infinite idea isn't really defined all that well anyway. This forever-ending, non-ending idea of, say, just 20 more people that could have existed beyond once there's only one person left and there's no one else, and you're sitting there thinking 20 more people could have existed, but they didn't. Well, that's your projection of value. You're creating some kind of mental state where you have some sort of relationship to these ideas, and it's all in your head. It's all a projection in your head. It's all fake, and the only thing that's happening is the thing that's going on inside of your head. Nothing more, nothing less. So, yeah, cause and effect, and people need to understand that cause and effect. If you understand cause and effect, you need to understand it on a deterministic level, because there's no other way of looking at it, unless you're just overtly distracting yourself from the concept to begin with. So I think that's everything I need to say in this video, and I've explained everything good enough, I think. So yes, thank you, and until next time, bye.